The next item on tonight's first reading agenda is the further discussion of the stormwater utility. This is the fourth of four presentations. Tonight we'll hear some recommendations from staff and our consultant, MFSG. These recommendations are of a broad nature concerning the creation of a stormwater utility and general information about fees. You will not hear any recommendations tonight about some of the details such as billing administration, things of that nature. We are not actually seeking direction tonight, just further conversation. We will be seeking direction from the council probably in early to mid-November, at which time the options will be, should we continue exploring this? If the answer is yes, a public engagement and education and information sharing process will ensue, or in the alternative, the council could direct staff to stop looking into this issue. So tonight is fourth of four presentations for further discussion, and David Hyder from MFSG is here tonight to present again.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dave. Mayor, council members, it's good to see you again. As Dave mentioned, tonight we're going to focus in on the recommendations, but first off, we do want to go over a little bit of the background on the study. So we want to provide a study overview, give you a background on where we've been. We then want to focus in on what the specific big picture recommendations are that we have for the study. Again, want to remind you of where we've been in terms of the last, I guess, 2 months. In early August, we met to talk about the background and the overview of what a stormwater utility looks like, some of the big policy issues that had to be discussed, which we have discussed in workshops 2 and 3. Second workshop in the middle of September, we talked about the level of service, what it costs to operate the stormwater system, and the magnitude of the fee. Workshop 3, we looked at 2 weeks ago, we looked at the stormwater fee analysis, what a potential basis for that fee would be, and also talked briefly about a credits program. And then tonight, workshop 4, we're going to focus on recommendations. So first off, taking you through the stormwater overview, just want to step back a minute and remind you of the assets that you have in the stormwater system. The stormwater system was built over the last 80 years, so it's taken a long time to bring it to where it is today. And it cost a lot of money to build, and it's going to cost a lot of money to replace. And as we know, it costs a lot to maintain these assets. Stormwater system contains 3 major watersheds, 11 miles of streams. About 2/3 of the village is drained by storm sewers, consisting of 130 miles of storm sewer mains. About 1/3 of the village is drained by ditches, 140 miles of ditches. And the village stormwater system includes about 315 stormwater
The protocol is typically to do that when you're asked a really tough question. That's how you buy time.
Yeah. Is that a first? It's happened before? Okay, good. All right. Didn't want to be the first. All right, so moving on. Level of service, we talked about that in workshop 2. And again, the building blocks level of service, operating and maintenance expenses, your day-to-day operating the stormwater utility, outstanding debt service, you have to repay any debt that you've issued. And then on top of that, we need to fund planned capital improvements, both expansions of the system and repairs and replacements. The total of that would give us our current level of service or the cost of operating the stormwater system. So here's the forecast that we provided under the current level of service. You can see the operating and maintenance expenses in 2013 are estimated to be about $1.6 million, increasing to about $1.9 million over the 5-year period. You have existing debt payments. For the 2008 bond issue, those will be paid off by 2038. They're pretty much level payments. You're paying more in interest now than you are in principal, but like a mortgage, that changes over time. And then the last component is capital maintenance and replacement. You're spending about $500,000 in 2013. That's going to ramp up to 1.7 by 2016. You can see the total level of service in 2013 of $3.3 million. Ramping up to about $4 million by 2017. This is the current stated level of service. Under this level of service, particularly I wanted to mention within their maintenance and replacement of the lines, spending about $500,000 a year results in about a 220-year replacement cycle of your mains. So if you maintain that current spending level, it will take you 220 years to replace your current mains at the 130 miles of mains. So that's the current level of service. We also looked at a recommended level of service, which builds upon that current level. You can see again the current levels shown there. In addition to that, we have recommended incremental O&M expenses. And these expenses were developed based upon your Stormwater Master Plan that was completed in 2006. It identified the necessary spending levels and maintenance to meet your NPDES permit. Then on top of that, we have capital, recommended incremental capital, which includes additional replacement as well as funding the watershed improvements. The recommended capital would get you more in line in a sustainable replacement cycle, would put you on about a 100-year replacement cycle of your stormwater mains. So that's an overview of the current level of service and the recommended level of service. Then wanted to refresh your memory briefly on the current revenues. In 2013, the estimated revenues for stormwater activities are a total of $2.5 million. You can see the various components, most of it being property taxes, $815,000 from the general fund, a little bit from developer contributions, property taxes to repay the debt, and then property taxes for stormwater maintenance. So again, the majority of the current revenues are property taxes, 2.5. So naturally, when we compare those current revenues with the stated level, current level of service, as well as the recommended level of service, we can identify that there's a fairly sizable funding gap, particularly with the recommended level of service. In 2013, we're looking at about a $3.2 million shortfall if you attempted to fund the recommended level of service in that particular year. It should be noted that 2013, your current stated revenues will not provide sufficient funds to fund your current level of service. Therefore, you would have to reduce your level of service if you don't increase revenues. So that's the level of service, the funding gap analysis. Next, I want to remind you what we talked about last week, where we talked about the potential unit of measure for the stormwater fee, which we would recommend that you'd use impervious area. It is an industry best practice. Impervious area, again, is any area on a property where water can't penetrate. The reason it's an industry best practice is it relates directly to the runoff and the demand on the stormwater system. If you have more impervious, you're going to generate more stormwater. And fortunately, this data is readily available within the village. We know the impervious area on all the parcels within the village. As shown here in the chart, you can see the breakdown of impervious. That's in square footage. The majority or the biggest piece is within residential at 47%, 36% is commercial, and then about 8% each for industrial and tax exempt. So that's a picture of the rate base. And we wanted to again mention that we think this is a real important slide that compares the current way that you collect revenues. The left-hand side of the pie chart here shows the current revenue allocation, so how you currently collect revenues for stormwater activities. You get about 76% of your revenues from residential customers for stormwater, 21% from commercial. And then over to the right, bringing back up the impervious area, again, you get 76% of your revenue from residential customers, but only 47% of the impervious area is residential in nature. So there is an inherent inequity in the current structure. You're collecting a lot of revenues from a customer class or a property group that don't have as much impervious in line with the amount of revenue you're collecting. That's an important comparison there. So that's the overview. That's where we've been. Now we want to talk about our recommendations and spend the majority of the time here. So our first recommendation is that we do think that the village should implement a stormwater utility and a stormwater fee. There's a number of reasons why we think it's the appropriate thing to do. The first is that, as just mentioned, it would improve the equity. The current approach does not have the equity that an impervious area fee-based approach would have. The improved equity would also allow you to reduce property taxes to better shift how revenues are collected. It would also allow for fiscal accountability. The stormwater fee itself that would be collected would be based upon the level of service. It wouldn't be based on a tax rate or anything like that. And those revenues that are collected could only be used for stormwater activities, just like in the water fund or the water system. It would provide a dependable revenue stream. If you look back at the history of revenues for stormwater, they've been highly volatile, up and down. When you have a dependable revenue stream, such as a fee, you know how much revenue you're going to collect. Therefore, you can manage the system better. You can be proactive in your management versus reactive. Typically, the way stormwater works currently is if you have a big event, maybe stormwater rises to the forefront and gets some additional funding, but that's typically how it works. If there's routine maintenance, doesn't get it done to the level that it should because you don't have that dependable revenue stream. And lastly, there would be increased public awareness. Just going through this exercise has brought the issues related to the stormwater utility or stormwater activities to the public's awareness. A fee brings that even greater awareness. It allows the public to understand the magnitude of the investments that you're making in the stormwater system. And it also allows the public to take action to mitigate stormwater on their property, make better decisions when they're reconstructing or putting in impervious area, things of that sort. In terms of the fee structure, we talked about this a lot last week. We do recommend that when you implement the fee that you do use impervious area. It's an industry best practice. We have the data. And that you base it on equivalent runoff units. Looking at the two classes, we'd recommend that for single-family residential, you do a tiered ERU approach, like we talked about last week. So those with impervious area from 1 to 2,500 square feet would pay 0.75 of an ERU. The average impervious falling in the middle there with the 2,500 to 4,000 being 1 ERU, and then the large ERUs paying 1.5. Again, the average impervious for single-family residential in the village is 3,300 square feet. Non-single-family residential should be based upon the actual impervious area turned into equivalent ERUs, so multiples of the 3,300 square feet. In terms of the administration of the stormwater utility, we do recommend that the village assess the stormwater fee to all properties, that there should be no exemptions, and that you should offer credits for on-site stormwater management. We talked a lot about that last week. A lot of the discussion was around credits and a credit program. I do want to emphasize that a well-designed credit program should really focus on offering credits to properties that have the opportunity to actually reduce stormwater impact. Really, that should be your primary focus, at least initially, to zero in on offering credits and reductions to those that really can reduce the stormwater runoff from their property. And also just to limit the complexity of the program, at least initially. As you get this off the ground, assuming it would move forward, this is one of the administrative burdens that could result if you have an extremely complex credit program. And lastly, you got to realize that any reductions that you offer via credits will result in increased fees. So if we give everybody a 50% reduction, we're going to get 50% of the revenue we thought, and we would have to increase the fee that much more. So those are the key points in terms of a well-designed credit program. In terms of the recommendation for the funding level and how we think you should roll out the fee, we think you should fund in 2013 the current level of service, as we recommended, the $3.5 million. And to fund that approach, we would recommend that you reduce the current property tax funding from the $2.5 million, reduce that down to just pay for the existing debt service, which is $1.1 million, and that you continue to do that for the life of the loan. So you continue to have some property taxes funding the stormwater utility, but just funding the property taxes. And then we recommend that you implement a stormwater fee that funds that gap between the existing debt service, or from the $1.1 million up to the $3.5 million. A number of reasons why we recommend that. We think you need to, and reasons why we're not recommending jumping immediately to the recommended level of service. If you think about on a parallel with the water system, we knew that you weren't funding enough on the water system, yet we designed phased-in rates to minimize the impact and things of that sort. Also, as we're rolling this out, if we immediately became completely dependent upon stormwater fees, if there were some administrative hiccups or things of that sort, we would be out of revenue stream for stormwater activities. So the way this plays out, again, here's your current revenues shown here. 2013, general fund funding, developer contributions, the property tax levy for stormwater maintenance, and then the current stormwater fee of $0. On to the right, you would see the proposed General fund would go to zero. We would get rid of the property tax levy. The stormwater fee would generate $2.3 million, which would allow us to fund our stated level of service, current level of service at $3.5 million. The net result there is that you would have a reduction in property taxes of $1.33 million in 2013. So there would be a net reduction in property taxes. How this plays out to fund that gap between the existing debt service and the stated level of service, you can see what the stormwater fees would be. So it would be $420 per month for a Tier 1 residential, $560 for a Tier 2. That's the average where most of your properties fall within the village. Tier 3 would be $840, and the non-single residential would be based on the multiples of the ERUs at $560. So we do have some examples here of impacts based upon the recommended fees. 2013, here's the monthly fee for various property types within the village. So obviously the single-family residential we've talked about. The average church with 18 ERUs would pay about $100 per month. The hospital and the university, we've assumed because of the significant stormwater facilities with mitigation activities on their sites, we've assumed a 50% credit. So you can see what their fee would be. And then some other examples, with the average commercial being 20 ERUs at about $112 per month. We want to take you through a few more just real-world examples. This is a home within the village that falls into the Tier 1. You can see the impervious here shaded in red. The total impervious on this property is about 1,700 square feet. And that would fall within the Tier 1 of 0.75 ERUs. And therefore, they would pay $420 per month. We did calculate, assuming you reduce property taxes by $1.33 million, this property would see a property tax reduction turned into a monthly basis amount of $4.73. So that would exceed the amount that they would pay in the stormwater fee. So if you do reduce property taxes by $1.33 million, again, turning their property tax reduction into a monthly amount would be a reduction of $4.73 for this property. We have another property, a little bit different here, narrow property. The impervious is shown here. Very similar impervious area, about 1,700 square feet. Again, they would fall into the 0.75 ERUs. They have a lower assessed value, though, on this property. They would pay $420 in a stormwater fee. Their property tax reduction would be $2.90. And again, that's a monthly amount, taking the annual property tax reduction and turning it into a monthly amount, assuming you'd reduce property taxes. Two more examples here within the Tier 2. So this would be more of the average. This property has 3,200 square feet of impervious. Therefore, they fall in the 1 ERU, very average property in terms of impervious. They would pay $560. Their property tax reduction on a monthly basis would be $6.25. Next example, again, falls in Tier 2. Very average, 3,200 square feet, falls in a Tier 2, so it has 1 ERU. They'd pay $560 in a stormwater fee. Their property tax reduction would be $5.80 for this particular property. And then we have two more examples that would fall within the Tier 3. So these are properties with significantly more impervious. This one has 5,000 square feet of impervious, so they would fall within that Tier 3 range, 1.5 ERUs. So they would pay $840 a month in a stormwater fee. Property tax reduction for this property would be $7.36 per month. And then finally, our last sample, residential Tier 3, 5,000 square feet, almost 5,100 square feet of impervious, 1.5 ERUs. So they pay $840. Property tax reduction of $7.80. So that gives you a feel for the impact on a range of residential properties within the village in 2013, looking at the recommended stormwater fees. But we did want to address, that's just in 2013, we wanted to address the long term. We think over time you do need to get to the recommended level of service because to 220-year replacement cycle for your mains isn't sustainable, nor will you eventually, there would be concerns whether you could meet your permit under NPDES if you're not meeting their master plan recommendations for maintenance and items like that. So we do recommend that over a long-term period, you move towards providing the recommended level of service. Recommend that you consider doing that over a 10-year period. So you'd incrementally increase the stormwater fees annually to reach the recommended level of service by 2022, again, a 10-year period. If you were to do annual increases in order to get there, you'd have to do a 17% increase every single year for 10 years to get to the recommended level of service. Realizing that in 2022 it costs more to maintain the system due to inflation and things of that sort. So it's not a static level of service, you could say. So in summary, we believe the implementation of the recommendations will accomplish a number of things. First off, we'll bring the level of funding for the stormwater up to the current level of service. Under the current approach, you will not be able to fund your current level of service in 2013. There aren't sufficient revenues. It would allow you to reduce the property tax levy by $1.33 million if you chose to do so. It will begin addressing the inequity between the current funding approach. If you remember the inequity of the current approach with residential paying more than they should due to the property tax. It would put in place a dedicated revenue stream that would allow for fiscal accountability that would generate $2.4 million in revenues that would specifically be dedicated to stormwater. It does maintain a source of funding for existing debt service, so it mitigates the financial instability potentially as shifting to a stormwater fee. And lastly, the stormwater fee would encourage on-site stormwater management. So we are now open for questions and discussion.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that the real decision tonight is whether to keep working on this or not, or whether we go off another direction, not necessarily to start checking off boxes or picking numbers or things like that.
Right, and actually we're just more interested, frankly, in the discussion and questions you may come up with, and then we'll put on for a first reading in early or mid-November the actual question of should we keep going or should we stop here.
Okay, so we're actually one step even before what I just
Yes.
said. All right. Well, again, it strikes me that there are only so many options that one has. It's either do nothing, which seems to be an unacceptable choice, to continue funding it the way it is, which seems to be just ridiculously unfair and ineffective, or to do something different. And what we're proposing is doing something different. And I suppose there are yet still different things to do. We could put it on the telecommunications tax, I suppose, but that's not only unstable, but has absolutely nothing to do with stormwater runoff. So this seems to be the most logical approach in terms of equity and relation to the subject that you're trying to address. And also you've got the benefit of potentially some behavior modification that actually goes to the greater good. But I appreciate the presentation. I mean, I think we're now getting to a level where it's answering a lot of questions about how things would actually operate and function and how it would look and how it would impact real properties here in our community. So I'll just open it up to questions or comments from members of the council. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it was around now in 2006 that we had probably one of our worst storms and flooding events in our Downers Grove history. I think it was like October 6th or 7th, 2006, which prompted in 2007 and 8 the watershed infrastructure improvement plan, which outlined our current set of projects and goals with stormwater management. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and we've made a lot of improvements since 2008 when we started those projects, some really big projects like Washington Park and McCollum, and a lot of in-street repairs and improvements. And thinking about this, in order to keep those projects maintained and actually viable for our residents, we need to find a way to get some revenue to maintain them. But there's still a lot of projects that need to be done also. And I think as we go forward, something like this in the stormwater utility is a way to continue the maintenance and the infrastructure that we need for stormwater. We've done a great job because we've had some big storms between now and 2006, and there's obvious improvements out there in the village. As we go forward, I think I know I'll be in favor of getting some more details about this, but some of the details that I'll be interested in seeing include more information on the credits. Obviously, we talked about that last week about some of the commercial, industrial, non-taxed or tax-exempt properties. This one, I don't know if we brought up, I think somebody might have, the actual billing mechanisms. I know this is getting way ahead of it, but it's on my list here, something I thought of tonight. Different mechanisms for billing, how we can make it as user-friendly for our residents and customers. And then, of course, this kind of goes to our staff as the public education component. I know Commissioner Schnell often talks about that. This is a big deal. It's something that we need to really enforce and reinforce with our residents why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and how it's going to impact them. So these reports and these presentations have been fantastic. I think we're at a point now where we can work with the consultant and our staff to come up with an actual plan for implementation, but there's going to be some time that it takes. It's a long-range idea. It's kind of fitting into our long-range financial planning and the way that we've been budgeting in Downers Grove with a long-range look at sustainability and revenue sources that are directed at specific funds. So sitting here tonight with the information ahead of us, I think I will support going forward with continuing the discussion, trying to find ways that we can make this work for Downers Grove, but I think we've got a lot of the hard work done with these presentations. And last comment, the rebate or the abatement of the property tax levy is a huge component that I'm very satisfied to see was worked into this plan. And while it doesn't sound like a lot of money, it almost makes sense to me that we're not levying for that amount anymore for stormwater needs, but we're going to have a utility for it. So that's part of the discussion that I'm pleased to see. That's all I have for now, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Schnell.
I have a question on slide 7, and I don't know whether I'm reading it wrong, but anything's possible. Under current level of service, under capital maintenance and replacement, it seems like between fiscal year of 15 and 17, the amount of money that we put into maintenance drops. In fact, it drops 185,000, 715,000, and goes to $1 million. Do you see what I'm saying? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's based on your specific capital improvement program. So you do have specific capital projects that would fall into the capital maintenance and replacement. Replacement of stormwater mains remains at $500,000 a year, but you do have specific capital projects in the form of capital maintenance that are programmed for 2015 and 16, and that's why it jumps up like that.
So basically, the fact that it goes down is a product of our budget, if you want to call it that, but the ability to pay for projects under the present level of service?
Actually, what I think this reflects is a couple of things, that the further out you go in those out years, the less accurate or those numbers are. I think it shows the trend, and it also reinforces that sometimes these capital maintenance items are lumpy. Those dollars jump up and down based on if you have a big project or not. I think the trend, though, of it increasing, generally increasing, if that line moves a little bit up and down, it's certainly going to increase over time, and we will fine-tune those numbers as we move along in the process.
Because if you go to the next slide, which is the recommended level of service, there's much more consistency to that line. That's the only reason that it jumped out.
Yeah, and
That's why it's recommended.
I guess so.
well, and I can speak specifically to that, is that, one, we are recommending that you spend an additional $500,000 on main replacement, and that's going to increase a little bit each year by inflation. And then we did build into that program, assuming that you would fund watershed improvement projects, but that you would issue some debt in the 2014 to 15 timeframe. So that's layering on debt in those outer years. So that's the reason why it looks less lumpy.
Okay. I agree with Commissioner Neustadt, and I think we need to move forward with this. The educational component will be huge. We need to hear from our residents, and I think once they have a clearer understanding of what we're trying to do, then getting the information from them as to whether or not, I guess if they buy into this is the best way of putting it, but whether or not they think this is a reasonable approach, I think is valuable. As we do the educational component, I think one of the most important aspects from my perspective is really showing that this is a user fee, that you really are paying for, if you want to call it a user fee, but you're paying for the amount of runoff that is generated by your lot. You're not just paying a certain amount because your house is worth X or Y or whatever it is, but you're paying for actually the size of your house and the impervious amount that you have on your lot. And I think that's very, very important, because I think if that's explained to people and they have a better understanding of that, one, over time, they could make modifications to their lot to help improve that impervious area on their lot. So I think that's important. I also agree with Commissioner Neustadt in that as we look at credits, I think it's very important to get a better understanding of what we're going to give credits for, and if we're going to max out at the 50% or if we're going to allow credits to be larger than 50%. And I don't know that right now. I know in your presentation you had said maxing out at 50 is probably the best way, but I guess as we progress, I'd like more information as to why. I know financially that makes sense, but why, if some developer or someone has invested a lot of money in stormwater on their particular piece of property, why 50 would be the max. And again, I think it's more educational for me and for the community and for this council. I think you've done a great job.
Thank you.
Actually, you've made a believer out of me, which I know when Commissioner Tully and I sat on a committee many moons ago, I just was one of those doubting Thomases that went, this is ridiculous. But you've made it so that it's clearly understood, but you've also made it, I think from my perspective, financially responsible for our taxpayers and for our residents, because it makes much more sense to do stormwater management this way, or at least have it paid for in this way, than just putting everything on a residential tax bill. Somehow that doesn't seem fair. So kudos to you, and I think as we progress, hopefully we can explain this to our residents in the best way possible. So thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Before I call on Commissioner Durkin, just something that you said, Commissioner, made me think of. Obviously, we have to start somewhere with the program, and we're already talking about phasing things in over time, and obviously, as we learn in the field, there very well may be adjustments to the program, assuming that we do this down the road. So that lends to a question of, for those communities that have done a stormwater utility and have already implemented one, and that have any serious amount of experience under their belts in terms of implementing it and coming up with maybe situations where they've had to make adjustments because they're realizing how it works in the real world rather than on a PowerPoint slide. Maybe we can get some idea of what are the most common sort of mid-course adjustments that are made. Once people get into it, they find out, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to change that. Maybe there are no changes and people just start with one program and keep going, but I suspect that there may have been some examples where things have been tweaked. I'd just be curious to know what those typically are, if there are any that are typical. So, Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I would support moving this forward and looking at it further in depth. I'm extremely interested in knowing more about the credits. I know that with our past experience, our education process with our residents and business community will be done to the best of our ability. So I have no doubt in my mind that we'll meet that expectation. But I also be interested in knowing from our partners, Economic Development Corporation, our Chamber of Commerce and Industry, where their positions are on such an issue. I know that this is a little bit bigger. This involves the community as a whole, but with their body, with their membership and who they represent, I think it'd be good to get some input from them so we get all sides of the aisle, if I can use that word. I understand, and I was trying to go through this presentation and the previous presentation, there are actually 3 levels that we could talk about with funding, and what staff and what you're recommending is the funding level at the bottom floor, which would be A. So you have A, B, C levels. Is it okay? I would like to see more information on the B level. I really would. And I'd like to know, if we were to do that, what the benefits were and what they are. Because as we know, when we raise property taxes to deal with stormwater, there's a significant problem. There is still significant dollars that need to be, or jobs that need to be done. And I think by taking this and trading that, basically the property tax bill to a new fee, and giving me back a credit of 80 cents a month, you know, to me that's not solving our stormwater problem. And I know that we've had heavy rains, and I know we've been lucky where the rains have come in the warmer weather when we still have leaves on trees and not on the ground. But tomorrow I think will be a compelling story, since we're going to get some heavy rains and there's a lot of leaves on our street. I think that we need to look at that, and I'd be interested in getting some additional information, especially I'm just interested in the next step up. I'm not saying I'm for it or not. I think it's imperative that we look at it because we do have significant needs that need to be met.
From a perspective of what the impact would be on the
Yeah,
example
what would
properties?
happen to, I mean, we've gotten this report saying, okay, I mean, all your different slides, you gave us, like, it's residential tier 3 would be 840, but if memory serves me right, I think it was what, 760 was their credit back a month on the tax, so they're gonna get 840 a bill, so, I mean, really, what's the savings there? 80, I mean, the expense, 80 cents?
We can have that information for you at the November presentation.
Yeah, the only reason I interrupted is it's a fair question. I was just curious what the scenario would be that we're looking at. Is it, if you forgot about the credit for a second, you just said it was a break-even scenario, for example, to see what that would look like and what those additional dollars might accomplish? Because I think what we're also talking about is eventually phasing into the recommended level of service, but over 10 years. Or would it be a question of if we phased in over 5 years? And I just want to get an idea of what the scenario is, because I'm as interested in it as you are. I just want to know.
I guess I'm a little, from what I'm hearing, I guess, and I've always had a more of aggressive approach, is, why incur more flooding? I'd rather do more today, and I've been a preacher of this, do more today with today's dollars, and trying to get something done at a discounted rate. And we've seen that in our budgets, where if we're going to be able to do it, what would the consequences be? I mean, if you came to me and said, Sean, I'm going to give you 80-cent credit, and I don't even know if I'm a tier 3, I don't know. I'm going to get an 80-cent credit, or I'm going to pay 80 cents a month for this service. To me, that's less than the Wall Street Journal a month, which is $10 a month. So to me, I'm just looking at it in my comparisons, and I know I'll probably get 1,000 emails or tweets or whatever you're going to do, but I am just more of an aggressive kind of guy when it comes to this stuff, and we're talking a few bucks. So that's where I'm at, and that's why I want to look at it. And I'd rather get it all out now and not read about myself about what they think I say. The other question I have, and I just want to confirm this, the monies that we raise on this, the profit, I don't want to say profit, that's my banking word, I'm sorry, the operating income.
Banks don't make a profit.
Well, it depends who you talk to. B of A, they are in the profit industry. That is really a revenue stream for future bond uses, correct?
Yes. The money that is raised as part of the stormwater utility fee would be part of a sustainability funding plan that would allow us to issue debt in the future to cover the capital costs that David was talking about, and then be paid off. Those bonds in the future would be paid off by the revenue
By the
streams.
dedicated revenue
The
stream.
revenues from this.
From these revenues called the stormwater fee, yes.
Okay. I hope, April, you got all that. And that's all I have. I appreciate it, Mayor. Thank you.
No, thank you. I just wanted to see the pictures too, but I wanted to know what pictures we were going to be seeing.
The aggressive or...
Yeah, whether it's, I think one was, just to be clear, one was if we were to do the next tier, what the impact would be, sort of in those example that we looked at what's the current recommended, I'm sorry, the current level, excuse me. Got to get my terminology straight here. Another way to look at it would be if you phased it in over 5 years instead of 10 years, I suppose would be another way to look at it.
Because over 10 years, you're looking at, what is it, a 17% increase every year? Mm-hmm. If we do it over 5 years and you're just,
Right. We'll probably leave it to you to suggest what would be
Yeah.
good snapshots to look at, but I think I understand the Commissioner's point.
8.5 and not B. Maybe
I had an extensive conversation with Commissioner Durkin, and there's a couple of scenarios and ways we can show that to you, so we'd like the opportunity to do that and bring it back.
I appreciate that. I just want to know what it is I'll be looking at when I see it, that's all.
How did Dave explain it?
It reminds me of a Supreme Court Justice quote that I'll forego right now.
If I could respond, I just did want to say that we have been, in previous presentations, we showed 3 sets of fees. We showed if you funded the stormwater to $2.5 million to replace your current revenues, if you funded the current level of service at $3.5 million, and then if you funded the recommended level of service.
Right.
So what we've shown tonight isn't necessarily the lowest, just replacing current revenues. It would be a fee that would fund up to the 3.5 for current level of service.
But current level of service with the right amount of funding.
Correct.
The first level was lacking, like we weren't doing.
Correct.
business.
First level was, so you actually want to see C.
Yeah, possible.
This is B.
Yeah, I'm clear though.
Yeah. That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. But anyway,
I also want to make sure that you get what you're asking.
Well, no, I talked to Dave extensively the last couple of days about this, so.
Okay. Very good. Commissioner Rankin?
I was not a fan of the stormwater utility, but you've done a great job at explaining the equity and making it fair for the residents and making the people that benefit from the stormwater system pay fairly for it. I have a question about the residential credit. You have to limit that, right? Since it's such a minimal amount we're getting from a household, you don't want them to be able to totally waive their fee.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of utilities, a lot of localities that have stormwater utilities don't offer credits to residential just because of the fact that there's very little that you can do on a residential property to reduce the true stormwater impact. Not that you shouldn't, there are utilities that do it. You certainly want to consider that, and that's really a policy of the council as to whether you do. But, you know, for example, if you have a 1-inch storm on a 1,000 square foot of roof, that generates a lot of water in terms of runoff. And, you know, if you have 1 rain barrel or 2 rain barrels, they can only capture 55 gallons of stormwater or rain in each of those rain barrels. So, you know, how much can you really reduce your stormwater impact if you have a rain barrel? Now, from a policy standpoint, it may be that we want to encourage people to have rain barrels, and we want to, you know, make this more community buy-in, and so therefore we would have a policy where we would offer some fairly minimal credit if you do have a rain barrel or something like that. If you have a big property, though, and you're residential and you put in pervious pavement, you know, that's an expense, significant expense to the property owner, and they could have a significant reduction in their stormwater. So you do need to consider those. It's just a matter of how complex you want to get. If you think about your water utility, you're a lot more sophisticated today than you were when you first started that utility. You don't need to do this all at once, would be one caution. And, you know, it's very normal to change course every year in terms of, you know, adjusting how your policy is. You do want it to fit with your stormwater ordinance and what the county's doing. And so there will be changes that evolve over time.
And the other thing is important here, not to interrupt, but I don't think we're anticipating that people are all going to run out and start digging up their backyards and turning them into giant rainwater storage tanks. But as development and redevelopment takes place and things happen, to the extent that we can encourage through some kind of a credit somebody to put in a pervious driveway, and you can go to places like the Arboretum to see what they look like, or to put in a sizable, not just a rain barrel, but something that will seriously hold a lot of rainwater. You're now maybe having someone convinced to do that otherwise wouldn't do it, and that actually does benefit the whole neighborhood. I think I view it as more in that category than people are going to start. Everyone's going to put in a 60 by 60 rain garden or something like that.
I would also like to hear more about Sean's concept. If we're going to go this route, I think we should have all that information. So on slide 18, you talk about that $815,000 from the general fund we're using now. So that can be used for other projects if we go forward with the stormwater utility.
If it's taken off of the property tax levy, we will not have that money anymore. If the council chooses to keep all of it or some of it on the property tax, then we would have that revenue available for other projects.
No, I mean, and maybe I'm not understanding it. The general fund, we use $815,000 from the general fund right now, but that's not part of the property.
It is mostly from property tax revenues,
sorry,
and all of it is spent on stormwater maintenance activities currently.
So it wouldn't be spent on it anymore because we would have the fee.
Correct. And this proposal recommends that we no longer levy that $815,000, so it would not be available if we reduce the property tax by $1.33 million.
Because we're not levying the 815 and we're not levying
The 511.
511.
Correct.
Okay, I understand that better. Thank you.
But if it were levied, it could be a source of revenue for other capital projects, including paying towards increased, some other debt issuance for streets or sidewalks or the other things. But that's another policy issue.
Mm-hmm. And my last thing, I really think it's important to reduce the property tax levy as part of this, because if we're saying that we're going to be charging people for what they're doing, I think that's an important part of the puzzle. So thank you.
Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank you for your presentation as usual. I continue to restore my faith in consultants. You do you guys have always done a very good job, and it continues.
He's not kidding when he says it, by the way.
Yeah. And I was also surprised with Commissioner Schnell's comment about, I always thought you were rather positive back, a decade ago on the stormwater.
She was just being polite to me.
Okay. Well, I took your politeness as approval, so I guess we saw eye to eye, and I'm beginning to change mine a little bit. Commissioner Durkin is concerned about, the hurry to get things done, and my concern is always with the debt. So if we can take as one of the scenarios, a kind of a pay-as-you-go, since some of the money that we're forecasting out is to issue more debt, I'd rather look at it as trying to avoid picking up more debt. So if we can have that, I would appreciate it. Credits, I always wonder, the people on the high ground and the low ground, they all get rain, but the people in the LPDAs, if your basement's flooding all the time, maybe you should get 100% credit. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do with people that currently flood, is what it amounts to, and then we're going to charge them for stormwater. I don't know. Maybe we ought to make exceptions there. My basement floods every time. Instead of a rain garden, I got a basement, so.
It would only work that way if you could keep it there for a week.
That's right.
It could happen. Not me, but we've heard some horror stories, and I would hate to adversely affect those folks financially as well. I was staring at the same slide 18 that Commissioner Reinke was looking at, and I thought part of the, I look at that 2008 bond repayment, and that goes out to 2038, so I guess the good news, folks, is if you're here for the long haul, you might be able to look for a reduction in property tax after we pay that off. So that's in 2038, something to look forward to, I guess. And then I look at the general fund, and I didn't know that, wasn't sure that was coming from property taxes. I thought that was coming from the quarter-cent home rule sales tax that we levy.
The general fund contribution to stormwater is directly from the general fund to expenses in the stormwater. So technically, the revenues reflect the pie chart of all the general fund revenues. 25% property tax, 25% sales tax, and then the other components that are in your budget book. But this proposal, for purposes of trying to achieve that equity and the reduction of the property tax, would take all of those $815,000 off of the general corporate levy of the village.
So that quarter-cent home rule sales tax would disappear?
We'll have to get you a report on the impact on the quarter-cent sales tax.
Okay, because I was thinking how equitable that would be. We are that's collected by businesses that I think would tend to have more parking space, more impervious. Now I'm just conjecturing that they would have more impervious, parking lot type situations, and would probably be stuck paying more. Maybe with this home rule sales tax, that portion of it going away and them picking up the additional, might be good for the business angle of it. I'm not sure. But the impact of the home rule sales tax on the whole stormwater utility scenario, I'd like to know about. And that's all I have right now. And just for the record, let's keep the presentations going and we'll look into this further. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions that don't need answers tonight. One is I'd like to know if it's possible to quantify the effects of as Mayor Tully said when we started, we have to do something here. So this is one possible means by which we would address the lack of funding that we really need for our stormwater system. So certainly one other possible means is just to make that change, to use that slide as an example of $1 million in property tax. I'd like to know if there's any possible way, either through experience you guys have elsewhere or from census data or something, that we might be able to quantify the effects on our residents of that deductibility. Not all of them apply, not all of them, get it. I understand that. But one significant difference is this fee versus tax issue in my mind is that deductibility aspect of it. Another question I had was, we had some modeling on those, I think it was 6 residential properties in the tier 1, 3, and we had kind of anecdotal commentary on the tax decrease that would be reflected by that $1.33 million reduction. I'd like to see the same data or same modeling for some of the commercial properties. There was that table that listed, churches and the university and the hospital. If we could get a similar sort of what if from a property tax standpoint on those parcels as well. Another thing that I'd like to see is the, and this is probably going to engender a little chuckle up here, but stormwater, one of the things that is a factor in our stormwater system, and we have, as we know, at least in the last 2 years, we've struggled with funding on all fronts. And so when Commissioner Durkin has talked about leaf pickups, that generates all kinds of reactions about should we be picking up leaves instead of doing whatever the list of 32 other things is. But leaves are certainly a detrimental component to our stormwater system. And I'd just like to know, maybe it's in notes from the past when Commissioner Durkin's brought it up, but what would the cost of such a program be in dollars? Because if we're going to talk about trying to get to a recommended service level over a 10-year period, maybe it's time to talk about some trying to avoid throwing all those annual leaves down our storm sewers. I think probably jump into a conclusion that's not fair for my colleagues, but I think we've chosen not to do that simply as a function of not having the money to do it, not from the technical decisions about the effects it has on the system. I think it's been with our existing equipment, our existing budget, it's not something we can do. I think everybody would like to keep them out of the system if we could. So I'd like to hear a little bit more commentary on that subject as we're talking about a 10-year program of getting to a recommended service level.
Well, let me jump in on that because I'm actually very glad that you raised that. Because in the past when Commissioner Durkin and I have talked about this issue, one of the challenges that we have with respect to a true leaf pickup program that would remove leaves from the street rather than raking them up, putting them in a bag and subsidizing it, but a true system where you rake to the curb and then a machine comes by and takes them away. Obviously, leaves and storm sewer systems are mortal enemies, no question about it. You want to keep the leaves out of the storm drains because otherwise it defeats the purpose. But one of the big problems is that, glad you opened the door, curb and gutter. Part of the problem with not being able to do that is you got to have a curb to actually rake the leaves to. And there's a good segment of our community that has no curb and gutter. Now, whether or not this could ever lead to something that would actually install curb and gutter through our community, I don't know. That's a big, I think that's a tall order. But you're absolutely right. I think it's a related conversation.
I don't want to create a total rabbit trail, so that's why I don't need answers tonight. But if there's any commentary that doesn't turn into a research project, I'd be interested in it.
It's actually been discussed before, and that's one of the. But obviously it's a big capital investment to do curb and gutter throughout the entire village.
The only problem with, and if you allow me, Bob, the only problem with if we were to do what the mayor refers to as the complete, or what did you say about the program where we come
rake to curb,
is that majority of the municipalities that have it, Hinsdale and a number of others, are getting rid of it because it's costly.
Right.
You can't afford it. And
right.
That's where we tried, you bag it, we'll pay for it to get rid of. I don't know what the outcome was, but
in that you're still reliant on somebody actually doing the raking, so if they don't do the raking, it doesn't solve your problem. The only way to truly do it is to have the curb and gutter.
I guess the thing is, if nobody wants to put elbow grease into it, then they're going to have to pay for it, and then they can't complain if they don't want to, I mean, it's a two-way street at the end of the day.
I don't want to talk about leaf pickup necessarily tonight, but it's.
Oh, come on, we opened the door, let's go.
I did, because we're talking about a system that we know right now is in trouble.
Yeah.
And we're going to spend you know, at $1 million in the first year and then 17% every year thereafter, we're going to start spending $3 and $4 million additional money in a relatively short order to maintain a system and invest in a system. I would hate to think that we would continue operations that would jeopardize it, or jeopardize at least its annual performance. That seems like a mistake. And then the last thing is, I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of this. It feels a lot in the discussion tonight like this is, you know, kind of almost a wash and trade-off of dollars. And there's this tax decrease for our residents, and there's certainly mathematically that's not something I guess we can argue. But one of the consequences here is that there's going to be a bunch of people paying who haven't before. That's the value of equity, hence the name equity. But let's not lose sight of that. We're talking about, I don't know how many there are in town, 22 churches or 28 churches or something like that. There are going to be at least them plus other NFPs who we've spent a lot of time, you know, stewing about their well-being as an organization, are going to start picking up a bill. And those are ultimately, you know, funded back by the residents that support those organizations. So just, that doesn't necessarily mean it shouldn't be done, but to not include that in the discussion, I think, would be an oversight. So I just want to keep that in front of us all.
That's right. Although right now those residents are doing that without their, without being asked. It's being done for them. Their dollars are being taken and applied somewhere else. But going back to the leaf issue, maybe in all seriousness, I think it has been a cost issue, because in order to maintain a system that guarantees pickup of all the leaves from every street, out of every gutter, every storm system is extraordinarily expensive, as Commissioner Durkin pointed out. But your point is well taken, Commissioner Barnett, in the sense that obviously with respect to efforts that are going to go into improving our stormwater system and maintaining it properly, there may be less expensive but equally effective and important ways to make sure that storm sewer drains stay open, rather than having a fleet of street sweepers. But I assume that, you know, we worked that into what the recommended level of service would be.
Yep.
Well, maybe we do, I'm sorry, Marilyn,
No,
maybe
okay.
we do, like when I was a kid, in Darien, when I was growing up, my parents adopted the fire plug, the fire hydrant in front of our house. You know, we didn't paint it, but we maintained it in the winter, no snow around it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
Maybe
public
we
education
ask-
campaigns,
yeah,
things like that,
that's
sure.
what we do there.
I
I
mean,
don't
back when the, what was it, I think the Boy Scouts did the, I forget who it was. I'll probably get yelled at for not picking the right group, but stenciling the storm drains, you know, do not
Oh, yeah,
dump
Junior
drains to the river.
Junior Women's Club, I think.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to get yelled at. It's the wrong group.
I'm sorry.
That's okay,
So-
just a comment. I think one of the biggest
Go ahead.
problems with the leaf pickup is the fact that Mother Nature does not do things on a timetable. As I said last week, you know, we had the street sweeper come through our block, beautiful, beautiful, like 4 leaves. And the day after they got done, we have lots and lots of leaves, which we did rake onto the parkways to be mowed, because in our neighborhood, if the storm sewers aren't open, there are problems. So, and I think that's the bottom line is, right now, residents have to take ownership of their block, of their storm sewers, and go out there and clear them. And some people do, and some people don't. But, or you just take your mower out there and mow it. But one way or the other, you've got to keep it clear. And I know Commissioner Neustadt has
Took the words
adopted.
right out of my mouth.
And I adopted ours, and as do all my neighbors. I mean, we all take turns, and we all do it, and is it perfect? No. But you do the best you can do. But one of the reasons why the village stopped that kind of leaf service many years back was the fact that if you don't time it just right, they can freeze in the curb or the gutters. They can, I mean, you have all sorts of problems with it, which is why I think when we originally discussed this, we talked about bagging it and the expense associated with that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not quite as simple as just raking it out to the curb and having someone suck it up, you know, because nature doesn't work that way. So.
And speaking of Good Citizen Award and Block Captain of the Year, that's why we were waiting for Commissioner Neustadt to lead up to
I don't have to
his
go
comments.
anywhere. Marilyn took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I think there was a budget question about how much more does it cost for another rotation of street sweeping?
Right.
That might be a small component of the details of the maintenance plan that could be, you know, given to us, so we know if that's part of the
We did get
recommended
that.
level for this kind of
It
program.
is, yep.
I mean, would that even be, you know, the village buys its own fleet of street sweepers again? And then we have them, you know, go to segments of town where we know there's an issue.
Anything further on the leaf pickup presentation? I'm sorry, the stormwater utility presentation?
Who's going to rake the leaves of the street?
Okay, they do in Oak Brook. Why don't we then open it up for questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to the continuation of the discussion or the exploration of a potential stormwater utility in the Village of Downers Grove. Any questions or comments from the audience? Any other questions or comments from members of the council?
I have one quick one.
Sure.
Did you get enough direction, Dave, for the future meetings,
Yes.
information, questions?
We will get the answers to these questions packaged up with a motion with an actual recommendation